talking here. But
Okay.
I have discovered that where you just have everybody and you're not in control, that there can be sometimes interventionists who want to mess the meeting up.
Yeah.
So I take it that you do at least have that control, eh?
No, we've had one or actually we haven't had too much, but you know, we do have someone hosting who's separate from me, and she is watching the wave bands and shutting down anyone who's giving evil discourse.
Okay, and then David, if I see some names here that I'd like to mention and introduce you to. God, now you see, I've gone off. Oh my God. Okay, the moment I start dithering around with the technology, I lose screen. So I'm not going to touch it. But if I notice anybody I want to bring to your attention, I'll let you know, eh?
Please do that. And you got the chat there. So shoot a figure, preferably when people are not speaking, because it can be distracting if you have chat in the middle of someone else talking. But just wait till they're finished and then send it through, or send it directly to me, and then I will gather that up so that I, you know, give you a chance to I don't know, to respond, to do whatever.
Okay. I am noting quite a number of South African comrades who are coming in on it.
Yeah.
By the way. But it'll be up to them to make inputs rather than
Please do. We welcome all inputs. That's why we are restricting you a little, Ronnie. Mainly to give everyone a chance to have a say. So it's not just the usual speaker from the platform, and that's
no, absolutely. Sure. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. I'm now under your control. Okay.
Okay, boy, that's a job.
And I'm finishing my tea. Guys, there's no whiskey hidden in this mug, okay? It's my tea.
I'm watching what you're taking.
I do want to greet Roger Silverman over there. Roger, give us high five.
Hi, Ronnie. Thanks for coming.
Thanks the way you set everything up. It's terrific. Thank you.
Well, look, let's make a start, mainly because we know others will be connecting. We've got, I think Dave is busy doing the hosting, and, you know, we'll be letting people in. Some are keeping more, dare I say it, a slower time. But let's kick off with, you know, all the enthusiasm that we have up to now, and just the rules. Well, Ronnie, I will be watching you, but not too fairly closely, but only in terms of time.
Yeah, please.
You know, so we are. Can I just say how, you know, extremely pleased I am to have Ronnie coming and addressing us. I'll give you a little more of an introduction to you later. To have Jabu present. Jabu's been an outstanding worker in the Labour Party. When everyone was dispirited and thought nothing could happen, she's actually managed to build a Labour Party in Oxford, which has actually won convincingly in local government, and actually won a lot of advances, small and large, in terms of assistance to, let's say, Black Lives Matter activists or people who are living under that umbrella, and changing conditions there, with a lot of support from other sections of the community. And that's marvelous in building. And I'm so proud that we've got, I think, 4 people who are from this odd colonial outpost called Durban, which we're trying to turn into the Revolutionary Center, because we also got Rob Dyer present from there. Jabu's family, you'll see Rob down there, former water engineer in Durban municipality. And we've got Jabu and maybe some others, and I'm hoping that we have some of the Durban dockers as well calling in. It's a very difficult at the moment. Most of them are on night shift, but you know, there have been promises made. Now, if I could just kick off by saying that you know, solidarity is the essence of socialism. Our support for each other, mutual support, so that we have our issues, we have our particular concern, but we support each other. We are building unity in action with a common thread, and that thread can extend fairly widely into all elements of humanity. particularly the most oppressed layers of society and around the world. And we are bringing together in some ways, in many ways, the wretched of the earth. I hate to use the term, but turning them from the wretched of the earth into the confident militants, of the present and of the future. As the poet said, no man is an island, and we are extending our links, our global working class links, internationally through this contribution we're having today. And people who've been excluded from humanity, and I wish to mention just in passing, the Rohingya people, Muslim, mostly Muslim people in Burma, Myanmar, who have been expelled and stateless and living in Bangladesh, who are hopefully present here today. We hope to have about 4 or 5 of the youth, present today, have been banging on our door and demanding solidarity in different ways. We're working in solidarity with Myanmar in that sense, and more from Belarus. And now we've been so aware that we are waiting for that call from Palestine, and here it comes loud and clear. And we are so pleased to be able to respond with solidarity, to the rising spirits, in the Palestinian community. So we wish to maximize solidarity. In the past, the slogan we had, at least I was putting forward, and I think most of the anti-apartheid movement agreed on that, sanctions against capital, the BDS part of it. And the other part of it, which we are wanting to explore tonight, is solidarity with labor. That's the other side of it. And how do we build that against all disappointments that we have, all the difficulties, because as the Beatles song had it, it don't come easily. It don't come easily. Solidarity without cost and struggle is really not worth it at all. In fact, it won't be noticed. It's not a press release, it's actual struggle, hitting you in the pockets, in the heart, in the head, and turning your time to the direction of solidarity with an oppressed section of the community or fellow workers in struggle. And part of this understanding that we have is we have to understand politics. We have to understand how it works internationally so that we can pull the levers, if we can use that term, of solidarity, and we bring not just tens, not just hundreds, not just thousands, but millions of workers into action on a common purpose at a particular time. And that's not easy to do. And we are struggling at the moment to do that, but at least we can see what task we have in hand. So we just need to consider now, and I want to now move on to introducing Ronnie. Ronnie, I have to say it, is a good friend. As soon as I came out from into exile, I found a bed to sleep in someone's house at that time, and that was Ronnie. Open door, and it's not just because I'm a Durban boy. There was a lot more to it. We had many walks and many discussions, and I appreciate every moment that you spent with me. It was not easy given some of our politics, and it happened. And then Ronnie has given leadership in the struggle. I won't go through all the details during the period of exile, but to leap forward into the period of the 1990s, where Ronnie is not shy of leading a movement under fire, as he did in the Ciskei, when many people died, as they are dying in Myanmar, marching against dictatorship and tyranny and fighting to be able to remove the Bantustans from the landscape of South Africa. And every time there's been a forward movement on the left, I have to say it, Ronnie, you've been there. And we appreciate, because you need to have large chunks, large sections of the working class in movement, and you have exerted leadership there. So the other way in which you've exerted leadership, and we'll hear more of it, is that the use of apartheid has not just been a slur, not just an additional word, but it comes from analysis, from actually participating, visiting Palestine, Israel, and actually seeing and saying what you've seen, and actually taking a tough set of fire, from sections of the Jewish community, and stood your ground. In fact, being adamant in standing your ground. That doesn't come easy, and that's appreciated. So you've risen to the occasion once again, and we look forward to hearing you. Ronnie, please take over. I'm watching you, but I also want to hear you.
Thanks very much for the warm words of welcome, David. And I'm actually really thrilled, inspired, and privileged to have been invited to speak at this event of the International Workers, the Workers International Network. And of course, to have and meet on the platform our homegirl, Dadewethu Jabu Nala. It's great to be with her and with you again, David. The incredible wonders of the internet has really been demonstrated in this past few days, this 4 or 5 days. David and I are constantly interacting, but out of the blue was this discovery that a Zim line, Israeli line ship, was heading towards Jabu David's home port of Durban, the most important, biggest port in Africa, actually. And in a few days, as a result of David managing to go back in years, as well as currently, to a few connections in the docks there with workers, we were able to establish from civil society and the BDS movement very dynamic connections. Now, you might be surprised to hear that. I mean, I'm talking as an activist in South Africa. I was down in Durban 10 days ago in that period. But as elsewhere in the world, there's been such a weakening of the trade unions in our country. David, in the late 60s, early 70s, when I was now in exile, he's made reference to it, had been instrumental then in the post-Sharpeville period when our underground in South Africa had been crushed, of coming out of a new youth, student youth on the one hand, Black consciousness youth, and these young white honkies who were connected to labor and surprised the ANC, Jabu. You'll know the history of being able, out of a very problematic situation in the wilderness for the ANC and Communist Party, of linking with labor and finding incredibly creative ways to assist with the upsurge of labor and the trade union movement at that time. As elsewhere in the world, there's been this huge slump under the crushing inroads of the free market, commodification, privatization, the deindustrialization, which has really wrought havoc in South Africa, and incredible disunity within the labor front and all other fronts, which is why I'm saying that when this arrival imminently of the Zim line, the movement in Durban didn't have the connections that were required. And there were a number of posters and posturers within the port who responded to our civil society BDS movement to say, don't worry, we won't offload. And when we heard that the ship was in the docks, they were falsely claiming what Amilcar Cabral always said, that revolutionaries must never do, the sin of telling lies and claiming victories, small victories. It was a lie. And by dint of the fact that I had the line to David Hempson somewhere in the backwoods of a place called the United States of America with his contacts, he was saying to me, Comrade Ronnie, it's not happening. There's nothing going on. Whereas the protesters and the activists outside were ready to claim the victory. So there hasn't been, in these days, any victory in terms of preventing the offloading of the cargo. But wow, have we scored there, as is happening everywhere else across the globe, what apartheid Israel has done, which is the case we see throughout history, the heavy hand of repression, how yes, it can intimidate, and for some time they can be on top, but that heavy hand of repression gives rise to the most amazing revolutionary resistance. The Palestinian people are celebrating and are exposing the hollowness of Zionist Israel's claims. Here in South Africa, I've just been on the phone to be freshly up to date with comrades from Tegweni, that's the Zulu name for Durban, and incidentally, Cape Town, East London, another port city, Johannesburg, where I live. I'm 83 and I can't get involved in the mass demonstrations without social distancing. So I'll come back to what's happened here today, but it's been so uplifting. So throughout the weekend in Durban, on Friday, there were hundreds of people outside the gates of Durban docks protesting against Zimline. And the South African state Transnet, who organizes the docks and the railways, etc., they had put up a hermetically sealed shield around the docks. They were so frightened to ensure that South Africa has good business out of Zim lines and that the offloading of the cargo should go by smoothly. But the protest outside has shaken them, has got through to our government, has mobilized that city so that today, this morning, there were thousands of people outside the port, along the popular beachfront, which is adjacent to the port, along the marine parade around the harbor, demanding boycott of Zim lines, no more offloading in Durban, and everything has fallen into place. So we're somewhat confident that the next Zim line that's coming into Durban in the middle of July, with the workers, and we had them at the meetings that I'm talking about outside the harbor, we had those trade unionists and your contacts and others there, David, and they were committed, and it's such a wonderful display of the internationalism that David has referred to, and drawing in labor into what has been very successful civil society protests over time, and of course, particularly now. There was a march in Johannesburg today on the Zionist Federation offices, and the comrades were reporting to me how successful it was. Peaceful. The Zionists had said that they would hold a mass rally behind their walls and gates at their headquarters in a particular Jewish part of Johannesburg. Our people descended there, not with enmity, in a peaceful way, with the banners for Palestine, etc., and protesting the Zionist lies and Israel's aggression. They had a miserable crowd inside their gates. Our people then, in a motorcade of hundreds, went to the Central Park of Johannesburg and had the most wonderful solidarity meeting there, with broad unity again, with labor organizations and trade unions, including South African Federation of Trade Unions, of Zwelithini Vavi and other stalwarts of the labor movement involved. So South Africa is rolling. It's rolling in relation to the end must come of Zionist Israel, and we're not talking about down with the Jews in any way, apartheid Israel, this Nazi-like, and I'm using the word because I quote Albert Einstein and Hannah Arendt, and I'll quote Aharon Sisling, who was a a minister of Ben Gurion's government from the left. And when the Deir Yassin massacre took place in May of 1948 between Tel Aviv and the road to Jerusalem, and that massacre took place, when Sisling heard of it, this man says, "We are now behaving like the Nazis and my whole being is trembling." And when Menachem Begin, the fascist forerunner of the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, and the others before him of Likud, was coming to raise funds in New York, they issued this famous letter signed by 30 important Jewish people of New York, warning the American people, this man is a fascist. Do not give him money. The danger for Israel are these fascist parties. Read that letter. It's a letter of December 1948, and it was in the New York Times. And Einstein and others were perfectly correct. We've seen that Israel, I'm not saying they're akin to the Nazis, they know death camps and gas ovens, but there's an open air prison called Gaza, which has been attacked 4 times now in the last dozen years, with thousands having been executed, as we see in relation to what's happening on the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, and within Israel itself. And here again is the victory, because the apartheid Israel idea and strategy of fragmenting the Palestinian people into these Bantustans and their enclosures, besieged Gaza, the entrapment of such people, what's happening on the West Bank, the refugees in the neighboring countries who aren't allowed back into Israel, whereas any Jew in the world has the right to go there, that the Palestinian people have found their unity. They have come together in the most amazing show of unity in celebrating, and it's a high cost, David, as you mentioned, in relation to your introduction. But people under any form of tyranny, oppression, the colonial oppression that Israel is actually part of, because it's a colonial, racist apartheid settler state, that they have risen up and they have found each other. The national identity, the national union of the Palestinian people is the greatest achievement we've seen, including, and a commentator from the Palestinian side, Omar Barghouti, has made this point, that the strike that took place within Israel itself, where the Palestinian shopkeepers and businesses, with the support of their people, closed down their areas in a strike. And that has not happened in Palestine since 1936. Of course, that was monumental. It was the most courageous upsurge, armed struggle, as well as labor and civil society of the Palestinians in 1936. But nothing like that has happened since. With it is the unity of the Palestinian people with the refugees and the vast Palestinian diaspora, which, David, in the United States, in Britain, Jabu, in France, in Germany, the countries that are the absolute backers of Zionist Israel, we're seeing such an upsurge, including from Australia and everywhere else, Latin America, the whole world, and the coming together in the USA of Black Lives Matter, Palestinian solidarity. We see it in Britain, Jabu, and thanks to your wonderful work in Oxford, London, Manchester, all of these cities around the world have had the most compelling protests and demonstrations, which reinvigorates the struggle. And the importance of that in terms of international solidarity and the struggle to overcome what people thought at one stage was an impossibility, to overcome apartheid South Africa with its 5 million white population and incredible power of its military and the support it had from the Reagans and the Thatchers with a bogey of communism and terrorism in which they tried to frighten people. That in terms of this, the South African anti-apartheid struggle showed what's happening with Palestine. There are two vital elements for success, and we see this deepening and developing. The one is primary, fundamentally, the struggle of the oppressed, the struggle against racism and tyranny and oppression and the boot on the neck and the people's resistance against repression, whatever the cost, and the cost can be awful. That resistance showed how it worked in Algeria, in Angola and Mozambique and Zimbabwe and Namibia and Vietnam above all, in Cuba and its survival, and South Africa. That struggle, along with the ones I've mentioned, and Vietnam was superb, the internal struggle and resistance supported by international solidarity. International solidarity, which has a range of elements to it. To break them down very simply, in relation to the ordinary people, the common people, the working class trade unions, the faith groups, churches, religious groups, and so on, the housewives boycotting the products, the students, the youth, the revolutionary intelligentsia, and so on. This in international solidarity, in support to boycott, to isolate reaction, to isolate racist South Africa, to isolate racist apartheid Israel, academically, sporting aspects, the educational aspects, the goods they seek to produce, the arms that they are selling, the trade aspects, the diplomatic and ambassadorial posts, sanctions, boycott, divestment sanctions, and above all, with the power of the people. And when it's led by the trade unions and the working class and labor, it's at its most powerful. And I'm not denigrating the role of students and youth and the faith groups, the churches, but it takes on a different dimension when the trade union movement is involved, organized labor. The pressure to apply against Reagan, who stood against the people and labor in America because he didn't want sanctions against South Africa, and that was pushed through in the anti-apartheid legislation that the Black Caucus pushed through in terms of Congress and elsewhere, forcing governments of such countries, France, Germany, they gave apartheid South Africa, Britain, these perfidious three, Britain, France, Germany, with, of course, America at the head, United States, to pressurize them to withdraw, withhold, to use their power on the recalcitrant tyrannies of the world. And it's that pressure that has forced Biden to pressurize Netanyahu and those dreadful, bloodthirsty generals to at least cease fire, which is fragile. So much more is needed to stop them in their tracks. And when we get that, and United States has got to be the #1 target with its 3.8 billion a year aid to Israel. And at this particular time, how cynical and sadistic and vile for Joe Biden to just automatically grant Israel a neo-fascist country, I would say, in terms of the measures it uses, an apartheid state, to give them 750 million to sharpen their accuracy with their missiles, as though that's a humanitarian gesture. I mean, they're so adult. You've heard Netanyahu and Gantz and company saying, we're not like Hamas. They are indiscriminate with their fireworks, which is homemade stuff, by the way. We are discrimination. We don't fire our bombs and artillery, the grossest weapons in the world. We pinpoint. My God, they pinpoint buildings to hit at an ostensibly Hamas target, and in the process, they wipe out families of parents with their children. 60 children butchered in Gaza alone. So we're up against that. And this is why we have to do what this meeting has set out today. This network, David, Jabu, that you have envisaged, covering the world, focusing on labor, bringing people together in real solidarity. We are fed up with paper resolutions. We're telling the South African government, we owe so much to international solidarity. We should be the flagship of the world in relation to support for the Palestinians, and we are pressurizing them to do so. So what you say, Comrade President Ramaphosa, in Parliament, that we're condemning Israel's attacks and so on, but the Palestinians, Hamas, shouldn't be firing rockets. We will condemn Israel, and we do so even more strongly now. No way. We want to see action, and that action must see governments applying sanctions against Israel, total sanctions. Boycotting is what civil society has to do. The disinvestment is the trade unions, the churches, the universities who put their finances, their capital into investments they don't even check, which can boost countries as they did South Africa, Israel now. The BDS is the way in which the international community can assist, not resolutions, but in the real sense. Israel should not be able to enter the Eurovision Song Contest. They should not be able to play in the UEFA Football Championship. They should not be able to show their flag in the Olympic Games. This is how South Africa, and then its white citizens, were turned into polecats of the world, where business is concerned, when their trade was being affected. Those business people who only feel any agony when it pinches them in the pocket, otherwise they feel nothing, they have no morality, that's when they begin to squeak. And that's what counts in terms of the elites of the capitalist world and those countries, that imperialist countries. We've got the weapon. The Palestinians, and I'm ending now, David, have said to us, Omar Barghouti leading the BDS campaign, he sent out a message in the course of last week. You are seeing the courage of the Palestinians. Comrades in the world, please match our courage. Find your voices to stand up in Britain against the Zionist witch hunting in your party, Jabu, that has dealt in the most disgraceful way with a person who's such a non-racist as Jeremy Corbyn and others in the Labour Party being expelled, whilst those very same people in the Labour Party are big buddies with the biggest anti-Semites going, and that's Boris Johnson, the Tory party that had Churchill and Balfour, the Balfour of the Declaration back in the day, who were the world's biggest racists. and Britain and France, Macron. These people are utterly racist with a colonial mindset. Biden and Kamala Harris, who have come to the fore. We were relieved that this absolute specimen, Donald Trump, was pushed out the way. But their attitude in terms of the international situation, and we see it on Palestine, is obnoxious. And thanks to the squad, the Democrats in Congress who stand up, and I think it's 15 or so, 20, who have actually demanded a different approach to the Democratic Party's approach. It's the first time we've seen that happen, a harbinger of the things that are taking place. So there it is, David. I'll end now. I hope I haven't gone too much over 20 minutes, but I've made that input. It's a challenge for us. I reinforce what you've said. And if we mean anything to our inner selves, to our families, I have Jewish relatives in Israel. I've got one or two who, thank goodness, to my surprise, are showing a soul. I've got others, quite frankly, who I've tried to keep patience with. And I'm at my age, I'm not suffering fools gladly. I have given them the middle finger in the way they try to pressurize me with the hasbara, the lies, the filthy lies that are spun from Israeli intelligence, which the Zionist lobby uses as they used against Jeremy Corbyn, and they are using in South Africa and the rest of the world. These are people we have to stand up against. So let's reaffirm and deepen our commitment and spend our energy in relation to the program ahead for Palestine. We must stand by the Palestinian people for the sake of the humanity and the future of all people who are living in a territory called the Holy Land. Thank you very much. Siyabonga kakhulu.
Siyabonga kakhulu. Ronnie, thanks very much for a very inspiring introduction, which raises many strategic issues for the working class internationally, and for a celebration of solidarity, which I hadn't heard about. All the details that we have from Durban are very inspiring. Thanks for all of that, Ronnie.
Thank you.
I'd so appreciate if you could come in, explain a little of the background of the stand that the Labour Party took, or at least a number of the councillors took, and then how that resulted in the march which took place in Oxford. I had to look at my watch as well as with Ronnie. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes with just a teeny bit of extension. Thanks so much.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Comrade Ronnie. Before I even begin this, can I ask everybody to unmute themselves and say Amandla?
Amandla.
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 Thank you, comrades. I'm one of the, I've been chosen as a councillor, Labour councillor in my area in Oxford, but a couple of weeks ago, me and my council comrades, we took a daring, solidarity stance against the actions of Israel. As Labour councillors, we decided to, all of us write a statement which challenged the state of Israel as far as the Palestinian oppression is concerned. We, at least 20 of us as councillors, decided to use for the first time the word apartheid, which for a very long time it has become a kind of a really frightening stance to take as far as the Labour Party is concerned with regards to the witch hunt that's been taking place in our party. One of the things that we said we stand in unwavering solidarity with the oppressed peoples everywhere in their struggles for human rights and liberation, including through the use of economic boycotts, disinvestments, and sanctions. These peaceful tactics were used by international solidarity movements history, including helping to secure the downfall of the apartheid regime in South Africa. They remain a powerful strategy to combat oppression in Palestine and around the world. So we took that stance before we were even elected. So we did not wait until after the election to take that stance. We took it and we risked not being elected in our areas. As far as the action is concerned in Oxford, we've extended this action to the street. We are known, we were active during the Black Lives Matter, the whole of the last year, since May 2020, since the repression, the killing of George Floyd. But expanding our solidarity to Palestine, we have merged with Oxford Unity groups from all different sectors, trade unions, students, faith groups, anyone that feels, like the indignation that we feel for the state of Israel. We've come together and we've had a huge protest, like many other protests internationally. We've joined in our international global struggle, and we were so blessed last week with the arrival of Jeremy Corbyn, which was an even more of a bonus. The actions that we are taking in Oxford have really mobilized communities. I mean, I've seen communities that would not normally come out to join marches, coming out in support of these marches. This was the same response we had for Black Lives Matter. But for me, more than anything, it was really important to come out and stand as a woman who was born in South Africa, who experienced apartheid. So it really felt that I could really reflect what apartheid was, and not more than anything. I'm always compelled by the statement that Mandela made about our struggles being intertwined with Palestine, which means as long ago as the times of Mandela, they have never separated themselves from the struggle for Palestinian autonomy. They've never seen struggles in Palestine as being separate in terms of identifying the apartheid and the nature of the oppression that the Palestinians are suffering. So my stance as a South African was to actually illustrate that I understand the impact of the Group Areas Act that led to the Sharpeville massacre. I understand the impact of the June 16 Bantu Education Act, which led to the killing of the Soweto children in 1976 by the apartheid regime. And also, more than anything, I understand the propaganda by the neoliberalist press to actually dissuade people from understanding what is going on. I understand that because I went through it. I went through it as a South African. I went through it as a child of a trade unionist. My mother was detained and tortured. She was detained without trial. She went through all the bannings that Ronnie was talking about. So those experiences that I grew up with, I share them with people so that people understand what apartheid means. And one of the things that I said is one of the slogans is, I know what apartheid looks like. This is what apartheid looks like. And I feel somehow even all the slogans that we had, isolate apartheid, sanctions now, they are still relevant for this situation that is going on in Israel. And I'm very proud to be part of, to have been born in Durban, and for people who have, the Dockers have come out and they are really showing the world what we're made of. And I laughed yesterday, I met one of my comrades, Dan, who said, you really like your dancing when you're protesting. And I said, yes, we protest is in our blood, and part of the process is just celebrating our strength and showing solidarity with one another. I don't know how much time I've taken here, but I wasn't planning to speak for long because this was Ronnie's platform, and I hope you have a good evening with Win today. Thank you, Amandla.
Sorry, I didn't realize my Amandla was muted. Thanks so much, Jabu. You've taken a stand and you've done something more than that. You've actually carried through at a time when it was very unclear what could happen. You could have been expelled from the Labour Party. It was anticipated that could happen. It hasn't happened, but we know that the sword of Damocles is above so many comrades in the Labour Party's head, and that we are fighting for genuine socialist policies throughout the Labour Party, and it's against the resistance of the leadership. But you're doing it, and that's what we're celebrating here. Now, I'd like to open up a discussion. Please, would you raise your hands? Go to the reaction section there. I'm just putting it up now, and put up a hand or wave your hand wildly, and then I'll notice you too. We want to make sure that we get some balance between men and women, people from South Africa internationally and so forth. So please, if you haven't had a say, please shout loudly on the chat to me and make sure that your voice is heard. I want to celebrate one other point. I'm so pleased that Peter Cole is here today. I don't want to advertise, but I suppose I should mention that this is his book on solidarity, Dock Workers' Power, and it relates to the struggle which is taking place in Oakland internationally and in Durban. And it has one particular illustration here, which I hope to put up later, but it shows the dock workers giving the finger to a ship which came from China with AK-47 bullets for Robert Mugabe after he had stolen the election in 2008. And that was quiet diplomacy. That was what it was called. And so we want to have exercise of some quiet diplomacy, but also a little bit of a shout too, to make sure that our voice is heard. So please indicate if you'd like to come in, and I'll admit you. No, I'm just managing the process here.
Stephen has his hand up. Stephen Marks.
Stephen, please come in. I don't see you, but please, I take the word. Come in, please.
I only wanted to say that the statement by 15 Oxford Labour councillors and candidates that Jabu referred to, I've posted it in the chat. And
Fantastic.
About half a dozen of those candidates were elected either to the City Council or the County Council.
And we celebrate not only just a little victory, but actually quite a big victory for Jabu, which shows, a real politician at work there.
And she's also the joint chair of the Oxford District Labour Party.
Dare we not mention it? There we go. Peter Cole, don't feel that you are above commenting. I'm looking forward to seeing a few more hands up.
Dave Buxton has his hand up.
I also want to recognize Louise Colvin. I didn't realize it'd be a gathering of old friends. So Durban is becoming almost a majority group here. I'm very pleased to see. Welcome, Louise. Jihan, I'd like you to come in. I'm so pleased to see you.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, David, and to everyone here. If I may just, shed a little more light on the port boycott in Durban and the commitment by the local unions to refuse to offload the Zim Line ship that came into our harbor in Durban. After a few days and meetings with the unions, engagement with them, it came to light that the ship was unfortunately offloaded despite our best, despite our hopes. And there appears to be sort of rivalry and a bit of disunity between the various unions. And I think that's, represents quite a big spoke in the wheel for us in being able to, achieve a united front from all the unions so that we are prepared for the next ship that arrives. I also wonder if this is possibly due to the fact that this struggle is not our own struggle, as in the case of the South African apartheid struggle, but it's a struggle that's happening in another part of the world. So possibly, the unions here and the union workers maybe don't relate so strongly to it. And I'm wondering if possibly this is the reason that we can't achieve the kind of unity we did during the days of apartheid. Does anyone have any thoughts on this?
Jihad, could I give a very brief response to this? Just before this meeting, I was in touch with dock workers who are going on to the night shift tonight. And, they're furious with the leadership, but they feel that for a long time, as Ronnie has mentioned, there has been a depoliticization, that the international issues have not been posed to the workers. It's not as though the workers are indifferent, they're not indifferent, but they haven't been given orders, they haven't had that same democratic decision-making in the unions as in the past. I won't go into all the details. I'll be writing an article with one of the dock workers to illustrate this, but please do not give up. Please make a stand. Workers enormously respect a stand being made right there, and they will not break a picket line. That's the word that I've got. But we need to mount that picket line. But we'll talk about those tactics, and let me not go on. Could I recognize Madeline? Then I'll recognize Tracy. I see the name, and then Peter, and then Graham. I hope I've got you more or less in order.
Yeah, I'm Maddie Gray. It's my normal name. And hello, Ronnie. Thank you for an inspiring presentation. I want to ask a question about whether or not anyone has noticed a shift in the way Jewish people are thinking, perhaps in the States, perhaps in South Africa. I mean, I know because I've been a member for many years in the Temple Israel, that there are interfaith meetings at irregular intervals where one is trying to get, one does get leaders of the Islamic, Christian and Jewish communities on the same platform discussing something. But my question is there a growing split or differentiation amongst Jewish people? Are the people who are critical of Zionism and this has happened, is this growing? Because in the past 2 weeks or so should have given people who supported Israel a lot of food for thought and perhaps to revise their stand of more or less unthinking support to Israel. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Maddie. Could someone come in and that, not necessarily immediately, but to relate, when you come in, it'd be great if you could respond. I have a sign up hand for Tracy. If you could introduce.
Well, this is Kieran, Tracy's husband, Kieran Walsh. Yeah, I mean, just to mention two things. I campaigned for Jabu, with Jabu, in a ward in Barton here in Oxford. I'm the chair of East Oxford Community Association, and Barton is one of the most deprived areas in Oxford, and indeed in the whole of Southeast England in some respects, even though the council are trying to gentrify it, margins of it with development cooperation plans with the big local developers, but they're not helping local people in Barton, the leadership of the Labour Council. And I think local working class people differentiate between Jabu and those councillors who took this brave stand here in Oxford, differentiate between Jabu and those councillors, candidates, and the leaders of the cabinet here in Oxford, and the mainstream leadership of the Labour Party now. And working class people right across the country view that they've abandoned the working class constituency, and this is what's gone dramatically wrong. But not here in Oxford, because people understand that Jabu is there as a representative of working people and will voice their concerns and put their interests first. You know, and Jabu is involved in lots of the community groups and networking and joining everybody in progressive politics here in Oxford together. And that's why we've got a pretty vibrant scene, because the work Jabu and others have been doing here in Oxford are absolutely inspiring. And that's the way forward, working from the grassroots up, and Jabu's showing the way in that respect. The second point I wanted to make was about the report from the foremost Israeli humanitarian charity, B'Tselem, a few months ago, which explicitly said that Israel now is formally an apartheid state. And they listed it chapter and verse, the oppressions which made this designation now necessary. So that means that Israel's foremost humanitarian charity is now, could now be defined as anti-Semitic under the ridiculous international declaration of what anti-Semitism is, that has been used as a battering ram in the Labour Party to witch hunt anti-racists and socialists and hound them out of the party. I just felt that I had to make that point also. So thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Kieran. I really appreciate that point in support of our Jabu. Peter, would you like to come in and unmute yourself?
Hi there. Thank you very much, David, for inviting me and helping to organize this event. Thanks especially to Ronnie for his inspiring and thoughtful words. Thanks also to Jabu, who I don't know personally, but I'm so impressed by. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm a historian. I write books and articles about dock workers, and it just so happens that I've spent a lot of time writing about Durban because it's one of the most important ports in the Southern Hemisphere and Africa, but also I write about my home country, the United States. Well, because it's still the most dominant economic power in the world, right? I just wanted to say that I appreciate so much and echo Ronnie's remarks about how workers can play an important role in sort of international solidarity struggles. The San Francisco Bay Area Union, the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, Local 10 represents the Bay Area. Going back to the early 1960s, they started to refuse to unload cargo to protest apartheid in South Africa. But that's part of a much larger global story, right? Where dock workers in New Zealand and Australia, dock workers in various ports in Europe, dock workers in the Caribbean, refused to unload South African cargo. I should note that in the Bay Area, a significant part of the workforce is African-American, but it had also strong support among many radical white dockers. Going back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, those same people, as soon as they basically helped contribute to defeating apartheid in South Africa, in the late 80s started to condemn Israelis' treatment of Palestinians in the Gaza and other places. And multiple times in the 2010s, they've refused to unload cargo from Israelis' Zim line, just like the Durban dockers have been sort of doing here. But I don't want to fetishize dock workers. workers across the whole transportation chain have the same power when they're organized, right? And so warehouse workers, truck drivers, workers on trains, they all have similar power. I do think that industry is really important, but even workers outside have power, right? And so famously in the 1970s in Scotland, right, Rolls-Royce workers refused to sort of repair warplanes from Chile to protest fascism in Chile, right? Like, and there are workers, workers in Ireland, right, at a shopping grocery stores refused to sort of sell South African products, right, in the 1980s, right? Like, I think the model of South Africa is so interesting to so many of us because it's a blueprint, right? And BDS, but also climate justice have picked up on the global struggle against apartheid in the exact same ways that Ronnie was sort of pointing out, right? Like, so you freeze Israel out of sporting events, cultural events, right, as well as economic, right? This is obviously what's happening, but it is possible to succeed. I think actually that's very important to appreciate, as imperfect as South Africa is in post-apartheid South Africa, right? The end of apartheid is a victory, right? Like, and it has to be understood as such, and it has to be understood as sort of the contribution of millions of people in South Africa, but also with solidarity outside of South Africa, right? And that Israel is a small country, it's rich. It has a really powerful ally in the United States, but it is very sensitive to global pressure, right? Like in the same way that South Africa was, because it's an export economy, right? And so they need global trade, right? In order to stay rich. They also need, in particular, the parent or uncle of the United States, right? And so growing opposition in the US to Israel is also deeply important, right? So even outside of workplaces, I see there's a lot of pressure. And I would just say to the woman who was asking about Jewish folks, as a middle-aged Jewish person, I could say that young Americans are much more critical of Israel than their parents and their grandparents, right? Like, it's very obvious that Israel knows this, even among American Jews, right? There's this huge generational divide, right? Like, it's, I don't want to overstate it, but I think it's very real. That is no benefit in the moment, right? Long term, I think that is important. It doesn't help people in Gaza right now, sadly, right? But it's if you see the sort of the trajectory, in my opinion, I see sort of Israel losing a lot of its clout in Washington, D.C., which will long term be useful, but only with more pressure, right? Like, because politicians only respond when they think it affects their ability to get reelected. Right. And so I think there's multiple fronts in the same way that the global struggle against apartheid had multiple fronts, right? Like, so thank you again. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this event with people, with fellow workers across the world. Solidarity.
Thanks so much, Peter. Graham, would you like to come in?
Greetings, hi. I'd just like to say that I think we're at a very, very important moment in the struggle for Palestinian rights. I know around the world there's been great demonstrations. I've been on 4 in the last 10 days here in London, UK, and each one seems to get bigger. The 2 massive ones we had yesterday and a week ago are the biggest demonstrations held in London for any cause for 10 years. And the amount of youth on the demonstrations, well, put it this way, it really makes you feel old because you're in a tiny, tiny minority if you're over 40. And so in that context of international struggle, the comrade who asked about the Jewish opinion, we can see across the world's press in the liberal papers, in America and here in the Guardian, the people who witch hunted Corbyn are now wondering. And what's worrying them, in my opinion, is the intercommunal violence that we've seen from right-wing Jewish settlers inside Israel. This is something that's happened on a scale and been reported worldwide, hasn't been seen before. So that is one aspect of what is going on. And we will see now worldwide a huge new surge of activists and activism, which although it's a reaction to the terrible murders that have occurred in Gaza and elsewhere, is not just about that. It's about now people asking yesterday, what do we do now? What can we do next? Where can we go in our unions and so on? That's important. And so we're also seeing interestingly, here in the British Labour Party, of which I'm currently suspended for alleged anti-Semitism, I'll tell you what I did so people know. I called the chief rabbi a Tory, and that apparently is an offence. The British chief rabbi of the Board of Deputies, and that is an offence. It happened to be the case that I was getting a lot of support as a socialist candidate for the ruling body of the Labour Party, and so that might be a coincidence. As Roger Silverman's on there at the moment, I have no idea why he hasn't been picked on in the same way, but you know, that's for Roger in his conscience. Sorry, that's a joke. That's a joke.
I have, Graham. So have all of us in West Ham, East Ham.
Greetings, Roger. Yeah. The other thing, though, that needs to be said is that in the Labour Party now, there's a total silence from the leadership of the Labour Party on events in Gaza. And that is running against all the opinion of young people and the progressive people that we need to get voting Labour again in order to challenge the government here. And I think that's probably not the only country in the world where that's happening. Yesterday, I'll just finish. Yesterday, I was on this massive demonstration going through London. And I was putting up the banner of our local Labour Party, which is a bit odd as I'm suspended, but you know, they wanted me to carry it as a point of principle. And a couple of young guys from the Friends of the Al-Aqsa Mosque in London said to me, "Why are you here? The Labour Party hates Palestine." And so we had an interesting discussion for a couple of hundred yards. But this opinion of the official Labour movement has to change. It has to be changed, and the trade union movement, in my opinion, is the key to doing that, to showing what is going on, and that actually the Labour movement is the organisation that can change things. But greetings to comrades, and thanks to Ronnie. Thanks for letting me speak.
Thanks so much for your contribution, Graham. I think Roger will clarify. There's no friendship lost at the executive level of the Labour Party and the name Silverman at all. Now, look, I'm looking to see, Themos has indicated previously and now, so I'm really looking forward to your contribution. And then Rob Dyer, and then I think the two brothers come in, right? Themos? Mm.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I am overwhelmed by the spirit of this meeting. It's a long time since I had this sort of very clear and specifically correct approach towards the conflict in Palestine. Because for decades, I have been taking part in meetings about Palestine in these in various settings, and the story was, yes, Israel is suppressing the Palestinians, but the Palestinians should not use violence, or they are killing innocent people and this sort of thing. And that is definitely missing the point. But tonight it's something different. It shows what the real issues are and what international solidarity means. And I think that's the sort of thing that we need. And I'm leaving this meeting encouraged to continue a support for Palestine that I believe, that I felt and acted in the ever since the 60s. The second thing I would like to say is about this question of the Jewish-Arab relationship in Israel. Let's not forget that the whole round of this last flare-up in Palestine started from the inability of repeated elections to consolidate Netanyahu in power, and there was discussion for the cooperation between the Jewish opposition and the Arab party in the Knesset to form a government, and this is what is all this vicious, chauvinistic, brutal attack is trying to break up and prevent. I don't know what is going to, whether it's going to succeed, but it certainly makes things more difficult, But in these difficulties, sometimes ways are found to improve cooperation and go forward. And I want to say again that comparing the violence of Hamas with the violence of the Israeli state is just obscene, even the comparison itself. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Themis. I'm now pleased to have another person who comes from Durban, eThekwini. Rob Dyer, speak.
Thanks, David, and thanks to Ronnie and other people who've contributed. I want to address the question which I think Eric has raised on the chat about a socialist program for Israel-Palestine. This is looking a bit further ahead beyond the current struggle and intense conflict in Israel and Palestine, because I think that as socialists, we need to be able to point a way to a situation whereby people in Israel and Palestine can live under democratic and inclusive and non-discriminatory governments. This is what I believe a socialist program would look like. Firstly, for me, the idea of a two-state solution is a concession to the ideology of apartheid, to keeping races and religions separate. And what has happened on the ground in Israel and Palestine over the past half a century or more, in which Palestinian land has been stolen, taken away, and more kind of right-wing Israeli settlers have moved into Palestine, means that really for Palestinians living in the West Bank and Gaza, I'm betraying my South African roots. A two-state solution does not really offer a long-term prospect of a political resolution to the conflict. There's long been a call for the right of return, for Palestinians to have a right to return to the land from which they were expelled in the 1940s and possibly previously and since then. But I think we must also confront the reality that there are millions of Jewish people living in Israel. They are there for good. They will, any program which envisages the chasing out of Jews to somewhere else in the world is another kind of racist and a dead-end solution for the region. So a democratic, inclusive state, I think, must be the socialist, a long-term socialist objective. Now, the thing is, because of the intense conflict, and in fact, the Israeli politics has been polarizing with more and more Jewish voters supporting far right and kind of genocidal groups, and the Arab voters supporting a kind of more nationalist program. I don't know the details. Is an indication that the politics in Israel are not moving towards that resolution. And so I think the broader geopolitics have got to be a key, and the way that such a one-state solution can be brought about. It won't be an immediate socialist unity between Palestinians and Israeli workers. I think that is a long, long way off. But I think that socialists must be able to envisage a shorter term solution, possibly with international guarantees, with all the dangers that they hold for a single unitary state. Thanks.
Thanks, Rob. Dominic or John, would you like to come in?
Yeah, no.
Okay, there you are.
Am I unmuted? Just a few points I'd like to raise. Today I watched Prime Minister's Questions on the BBC. It was a rerun of last Wednesday's Parliament. And in that, you had Keir Starmer asking questions of Boris Johnson in a really mealy-mouthed way. And the only issue that was raised in terms of the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians was the fact that there was a growth of anti-Semitism here in Britain. Now, as far as I'm concerned, there seems to have been some activity in North London by a group of people waving Palestinian flags, shouting anti-Jewish or anti-Semitic slogans. Whether that's true or not, I'm not sure. But the other thing is that I don't think it's any coincidence that Netanyahu is faced with criminal charges in Israel, that he is likely, or he was likely, to lose his majority in Parliament. So in the good old-fashioned way of any imperialist, when you've got trouble at home, you create trouble abroad to bolster your position. And there's nothing like a bit of gunboat diplomacy to bolster, rally around the flag boys. And before we had the situation that developed in Gaza, we had the situation in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, where there was a massive invasion by Israeli police, leaving some 300, I think the figure is, worshippers needing hospital treatment or needing medical treatments. And that, I think, was the, if you like, the blue paper that set off the bomb. And since then, Netanyahu has done all in his power to create the conditions of getting, if you like, traditional right-wing support rallying around him. And I think the whole question of the position in Israel is one, in my opinion, in the medium term of optimism. I watch Al Jazeera quite a lot, and there's been quite a few Israeli journalists on expressing severe misgivings about the events in Israel, that the events in Israel have created, if you like, the settlers attacking Palestinians, be they Christian, Druze or Muslims. And I think that is giving grounds for serious concern. And also the Palestinians that have been on Al Jazeera have emphasised in their opinion that they see Palestine as a secular state, not as a Muslim state. So they may well be overwhelmingly Muslim,
can I ring you back, Celia,
but they're looking to, if you like, have an inclusive situation with Jews and non-Jews. And I think it needs to be brought home, particularly in the Labour Party here, that in Israel, we're now seeing if you like, a virulent right-wing settler movement that is not afraid of attacking Palestinians, that we're also seeing, if you like, laws being brought onto the statute book in Israel, which promotes Israel, an a Jewish state for a Jewish people. Well, having a Northern Ireland background, that has a resonance of Stormont being a Protestant parliament for a Protestant people. And I'll just leave it at
that. Thanks so much, Comrade. Could I now have Steve and then Ed?
This is Steve Zeltzer in San Francisco. I think that, obviously a one-state solution is more and more apparent to more people around the world, that this is the only way that you can have equality for Palestinians and all people in Israel and Palestine. But I think that one of the things that we need to focus on primarily is can the working class do on a global level to fight the Zionist regime. And I think the action in Durban, or the protest in Durban, they weren't successful in stopping the unloading of the ship and the loading of it. But in San Francisco in 2014, we were able to stop the ship because the ILWU members refused to cross the picket lines. So I think what we really need as a first step to organize internationally in the working class is a united front Stop Zim Action Committee globally in all ports that the Zim ships go to. I think this is the concrete kind of solidarity action that can hurt the Zionist state. And it can show the way forward for the rest of the working class that want to support the Palestinians and want to end the apartheid state. So my proposal to the people here, the comrades here, is that we work internationally to work to direct action of workers in solidarity with the Palestinians. And the first step could be the Zim lines. And I think there are efforts going to be made in New York and in the Bay Area. I think this coming week, we're going to have an action when a Zim chartered ship comes in. But I think we can, that's something concretely. In Ireland, the Zim ships are going all over the world, Zim lines. And we need to organize, we need to reach out to the dock workers, longshoremen, and other trade unions to call for support for direct action to shut down the Zim line. That will have more effect on the Zionist regime than anything else really globally, because we can't rely on the governments, particularly American government, which supports the Zionist regime, which supports an apartheid state, to change its position without direct action of the American working class. One important development in the United States is the connection with the Black Lives Movement, the protest against systemic racism, connecting with the Palestinian struggle. And that's reflected in support among Black Americans, Black working class, for the Palestinians. That's very important, because the racial oppression of Blacks, systemic racism, the apartheid attacks on the Palestinians are connected to the attacks that Blacks, Browns, people in the United States face. So I think that's another area to link up and build support for internationally.
Thanks so much, Steve. It's no accident that the ship in Durban Harbor is called Zim Shanghai. Now, where does Shanghai come in? Well, obviously, the Zim line runs a very profitable line between China and the rest of the world. I was amazed to think about that. And I'm so pleased that we've heard, from Oakland. We know that the local there has done fantastic work in the past, which is celebrated internationally, and that, the workers will take action again. We look forward to hearing from you again. Thanks, Steve. Ed, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Steve has just said. The working class has got to take action internationally. And I think it's very much tied up with the whole issue, that this question that was raised of, what is the solution to the conflict in the Middle East? Because it has to be a socialist solution. It has to be something that comes from the solidarity and the internationalism of the working class. Prior to 1948, Jewish and Arab communities lived side by side in the land that is now called Israel. And it was the intervention at the end of the Second World War, particularly of US imperialism, to try and make themselves an outpost. Israel is an outpost for US strategic interests with an awful lot of US intelligence, US military equipment, and so on, because it's a part of the world that the US has always found economically important because of the oil and so on, and also so strategically difficult to deal with. At that time, of course, it being on the immediate southern flank of Russia as well, it was an extraordinarily important military asset. And so they deliberately set out to divide the population in that part of the world to play on the conflict of religion that they could whip up. Whereas communities from historical times, going back thousands of years, had lived, Christians and Jews together. This is part of the divide and rule tactic of capitalism that created the state of Israel and seeks to maintain it. And I agree with what Rob was saying about the need for a unified approach, a secular state. I would just add to that, when Rob says that there won't be an immediate socialist solution between Palestinian and Israeli workers, there are times in world history where political consciousness changes very, very rapidly and very, very dramatically. And I think we see a whiff of that right now with the number of young people in all communities, including Jewish communities in the United States, who are coming out in favor of the Palestinian struggle. That the idea that you can, yes, maybe there are some diehards in the older generation who will never forgive neighbors who've perpetrated what they see as atrocities and so on. But in the new generation, there will be millions of people who not only understand the possibility of unity, but see the need for unity, because there's no way forward with a continual round of religious wars and so on, which get humanity nowhere. And part and parcel of that program to unify people in a common understanding of progress and culture is the creation of jobs, decent homes, health services for everyone, food production, the development of water irrigation systems that benefit everyone. And, in Israel, Palestine has got one of the highest population of young graduates of anywhere in the world. And the majority of them are unemployed. There are huge numbers of people with technical skills who could get to work in developing this part of the world, hand in hand with Jewish young people, to develop a completely new approach to economics, to full employment with decent jobs, low hours of work, because of modern technology. We're at a turning point in world history. There will be big changes in the next 20 or 30 years. And Palestine-Israel conflict can be seen as part of the resolution of the entire problems that are affecting humanity at the moment, the logjam that humanity is in, where capitalism can't take us any further forward.
Thanks so much, Ed. Jane, please come in. Yeah.
Thank you. Listen to all the seasoned veterans in the struggle, and having been part of the struggle, Ronnie knows me well from a little boy. I'm Billy Nye's younger brother. The struggle was fought in Canada when I came into Canada in the 70s after Soweto. We did the international solidarity work, the trade unionists, the leaders, and all the people on this panel I could see came through all these struggles that we fought against the apartheid regime. We did a lot of things. We taught, we educated, and we brought the working class together and the international leadership, both the US and Canada. And we brought in people from South Africa and trained them. And today they are holding jobs. They're holding positions in the labor movement in South Africa. And I was happy to hear that the dock workers in Durban, although it failed, at least they took a stand. That's number one. And number two, with the international solidarity, we had, from the education point of view, going through from the school systems, the boards of education. Now, this is the Canadian work that I did, and taught why we didn't want those outspan oranges and the grapes and things like that in supermarkets, because I came out of the supermarket industry in Canada. And then we had the farm workers from the US, Cesar Chavez, when he came into Canada, and we all, you know, in international, the word international solidarity, that's the key, getting the people that consume these products to boycott these products. So the same principle should be attached to what we want to do with Israel. We've got lots of stuff that Israel sends around the world, and the dock workers are number one. But what about the consumers, the people who buy these stuff? We have to educate them. So international solidarity, as Ed and Steve did mention, as I said before, we are seasoned in this type of work. I don't see the younger generation on this panel. I don't know how young the youngest person is at the present moment. All those educated ones with BAs, MAs, and MBAs, where are they today to move this agenda forward? That's the key. And if we don't get their support, and I know a comrade in Oxford is trying to bring them into the fold because she's a Durbanite again. And we know how to organize and we know how to toy. So the important aspect of this whole struggle, the BDS movement, Ronnie, you are right. We need international solidarity. And the only way is for the labor movement, the labor leaders around the world to get together, get their act together, and stop fighting within and try to look after within and without. Without meaning internationally, because without the international workers' movement all over the world, we cannot beat the system. And last but not least, the 4 years that we went through with the US idiot in the White House, we saw the growth of white supremacy. We saw the growth of the anti and systemic racism that goes right through the world. And Netanyahu has taken the cue from his buddy down south, and this is how he is behaving. He says he's attacking, and I think a gentleman from London mentioned that to consolidate power, to grab at power within the system, within your country, cause a problem outside so that the world can look outward and not at you. So these are simple strategies that the younger people have to take into account and organize and defeat the systems. Not only in Israel, we've got other parts of the world where we're having problems. We've got the problem in India. And add insult to injury, the pandemic for the last year didn't do us any good. It's exposed nations and it's exposed a lot of things that we are lacking. And we have to come back and get together again and try to use the wisdom around this panel to be sent out. As Cole, the historian, said, historically, we have a lot of history, but we have to adapt or die, one of the two. So it won't be in my generation, because I'm retired and I'm enjoying, and that's why I'm sitting on panels like this to give my viewpoint. But the younger generation is the generation that we have to, sort of give them the weapons to fight with. I leave that. And thank you, Rory, for your bustling speech.
Jay, it's so good to hear you and to know that Billy Noah's son is there active. I didn't know you were in Canada, but marvelous.
I'm the youngest brother that's
okay, well
alive
done.
today.
he was David, he was a very naughty younger brother. The reason why I'm interacting, hi there, Jay, all the best.
Hi.
You keep missing the home girl from Durban, Louise Colvin, has been trying to get your eye to speak.
Okay, good Lord. I mean, what a disgrace. Louise,
disgraceful.
I'm going to give you the floor with great apologies. Sorry, I didn't see the big hand. I just saw a thumbs up. And anyway, you are so welcome.
I'm sorry.
And then we'll move over to Felicity and then to Roger.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. And it's so encouraging and heartening to hear what people have to say and to make, I think, the really important sort of international link. I just want to come back to what had been said about the Durban protest and the picketing, and just to remind people that we've come out of a very dark period, I believe, in terms of post-liberation. I think people just got so busy with government and everything else, and we stripped civil society, jumping into government, the unions. Well, we had a tripartite alliance that actually just became completely sort of dominated by an ANC and a right-wing agenda. The left just seemed to have got crushed upon. The SACP seemed pretty toothless. And then the trade unions, the federation broke up. So I think it's been a difficult period. So, and then to say, okay, they weren't there. They didn't manage to prevent the offloading. Well, there was very little time. We really were given little time. It's like they're coming in the next day. And given the background, we weren't able to sort of jump and sprint to and be properly organized. And I think for such things, you do need to be organized. So I was very heartened, actually, to see the numbers that came out on the Friday. Oh, sorry, one other point. Transnet got wind of this and offloaded before they should have. We thought they were going to offload on Friday, so we were still trying to pull things together. They offloaded before. So, there are a number of things at play here. But I was very heartened by who came out. So we had the Kasatu, Safdu, the Sitawu workers, and all of them committed to this. And they spoke strongly. SACP was there. I haven't seen a coalition of some of these players for some time coming in. So I think that was good. And I really like what Steve Zeltzer and Peter Cole have suggested. We look at going right along the line. This is really important for us not to just say offload from the ship, but onto the transport things up to Johannesburg, offload into Woolworths, etc. I think, there are many points in which we should be organized and prevent, the handling in any way of Israeli goods, or, this is actually not Israeli goods, I understood, but just an Israeli ship. However, the next ship is due in on the 22nd, and thank you very much for all these links. And I think we can actually get organized. And one of the things I think it will help actually the left agenda in South Africa to focus on something that is so much in the spotlight and to join up with the international kind of movement and the workers' strength. I think this will give people a huge amount of purpose. And I think it's our role, the kind of Ronnies of the world, with the experience to do some really good awareness amongst the workers and the people who were present. There was a broad coalition of civil society. There was the People Against Oppression, but there was the Abaklali, Basmanjondo, these are the people who are the shack dwellers, We had a coalition of the poor. We had a lot of, talk about working class. Well, in South Africa, we've got to talk about an unemployed class. It's bigger than the working class, and we brought out those people, the South Durban Community Environmental Alliance. So I think that there's hope, forging a more left-wing agenda, a left agenda, through this kind of action. And it's up to us, I think, to keep the energy and the steam going. And the last thing, so I think it's really, really, really helpful to make these links internationally. I think it's going to be hugely supportive. And I think if I listened correctly to the trade union groups, they need that kind of energy and the thinking that's coming from you. And the final statement I want to make or I want to highlight was youth. The last number of years, I'm faithfully out there protesting every week against this and that, but mostly it's corruption. And I never see the youth. I see the same old people with grey hair. This one brought out the youth. The youth organized curb protests all around Durban. They were schoolgoers, they were university students. I thought this was fantastic. So I do believe that we need to encourage that more. But for me, I was quite excited because I think there's quite a potential for bringing all these forces together and taking forward our agenda. Thank you.
Louise, I'm so pleased. I got you in the end. I'm so sorry for not getting you in earlier. Just a point about youth. We do usually have quite a contingent of Rohingya youth, participating. I think they're a bit overwhelmed by, a bigger event. Ronnie, sometimes you're going to have to speak to those lads. I mean, they are 17, 18, and 19 years old, and discussing seriously, how to build, their own strength, and with Palestine too. Felicity, would you like to come in?
Yeah, thank you for letting me speak. And I have to say, what an excellent meeting this has been. Thank you to Ronnie, Jabu, Jay, Louise, and all the Durbanites, all the South African comrades who commented. Our history is terribly important. Our internationalism is massively important. And thank you to everyone who's come in on this discussion. And well done to Jabu. I mean, that statement certainly has to be got around the Labour Party much more widely. Probably mean you'll be expelled, but certainly it'll do a good pressure in the meantime. And well done to the dock workers everywhere. Sadly, in Liverpool, where I come from, we still have non-union docks following the defeat of the long trade union, the long strike of the dockers in Liverpool. And the class as a whole, in the organisations of the class, there's still a kind of frozen, there's nothing we can do about it attitude. And we've got to try and shake that in the UK. But the kids, the youngsters are just amazing, especially the young women. In Liverpool last week, we had a demonstration that started at a church which was bombed during the Blitz in 1941 and is deliberately kept as a memorial against war. And the demonstration met there and was originally going to be just a meeting. And then the kids decided, no, we're going to have a demonstration. So the kids, the march went through Liverpool, went down to the traditional place where marches stop. They had some speeches. I thought at that point, oh, well, we're coming to an end. And I left. But afterwards, the kids went twice more around the city to make their case and to shout the odds about Palestine. They're just fantastic. And the reports of the demonstration in London today yesterday is it today or yesterday? I've forgotten. Are wonderful. And again, everyone's telling me that the majority of people on that demonstration were young women. And it's great to see that. That gives us hope. So we do need to bring young people into the conversation, or as David said with the Rohingya kids, you know, we go to them and talk to them. We've got to get the conversations going with young people. We've got to try and make sure these wonderful meetings get to a wider audience. We've got to get the young people in. And I think using the recording of this meeting will be really important, as will be sharing Jabu's statement to get those ideas out. So, yeah, I think it's been one of the most optimistic meetings we've had. So the situation for the Palestinians remains extremely grave. Great that we've got a ceasefire, but there has to be much more. And we can't let the support for the Palestinians die or subside because of if for a while we have peace. But let's hope that the children in Gaza can sleep in peace for a little while. And thank you very much for letting me speak.
Leslie, you're always get to some of the key points, and you're always welcome, and we are looking to the youth, and we must work on that. Roger, would you like to come in now?
Yes, comrades. I think this has been just agree with everything that Felicity and other comrades have said. It's been a great meeting. It's been a real example of workers' internationalism, and it's built, in other words, on the best internationalist traditions of workers, going right back to the origin of the workers' movement in the mid 19th century, and through the Russian Revolution, the Spanish Civil War, and of course, most obviously the anti-apartheid struggle. Which is, of course, runs through the veins of a lot of the comrades here, and the comrades who've spoken from Durban and also from San Francisco and so on show that the internationalism of solidarity with the Palestinian people is something which is beginning to really, really swell and grow. And I think what we have to ask ourselves is, why is it then that it's been so slow to develop? And I think paradoxically, it's very much actually based on the internationalism of the working class, that there was an earlier sympathy for Zionism, a sympathy which arose out of the situation at the end of the Second World War. The point is that actually Zionism had no base in the Jewish communities spread over Central and Eastern Europe before the Nazis arrived, before that era. The Jews in Central and Eastern Europe and Tsarist Russia were, of course, a persecuted national minority, forcibly confined to their own ghettos. They spoke their own language, Yiddish. They had a distinct culture, music, theatre, magazines, newspapers, etc. And politically, overwhelmingly, their political allegiance was to the Socialist Bund, which stretched across half the continent. And Zionism was just an obscure sect and an expression really of capitulation to anti-Semitism. And the Bundists' riposte to the Zionists was, we're not going anywhere, this is our home. They saw Zionism as a kind of mirror image of anti-Semitism. So how is it? Zionism at that time, remember, it was an obscure sect, but it was seized on and exploited by British imperialism at the time of the Balfour Declaration. With the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire, imperialism had the idea of creating what one of their representatives actually called a loyal little Jewish Ulster within that turbulent, oil-rich region. So the growth of Zionism reflected the natural mood of despair that came with Hitler and the counter-revolution that had swept through Europe. At the end of the World War, Holocaust survivors had nowhere to go. They couldn't return home. Their homes had been stolen. Their friends and families had been wiped out. Anti-Semitic pogroms were still raging in parts of Germany and Eastern Europe. So many of them migrated westwards, just looking for somewhere to live, and they found themselves languishing in displaced persons camps, including one of which, by the way, was the former Nazi concentration camp Belsen. They're actually still there, cooped up there in what was now called the displaced persons camp. So naturally, when Palestine was founded, and before then too, many of them tried to get to Palestine, not because they wanted to found a Jewish state or steal anyone's land. They were just desperately looking for somewhere to live. And when they sailed to Palestine, where there'd been, by the way, Jewish settlements for decades before, the British sank their ships and they drowned thousands of these migrants, or hundreds at least, in the Mediterranean. So, something which is being repeated now, although the migrants are going in an opposite direction now. But the same kind of brutality, the same kind of callous disregard for human rights. And this, by the way, was done under a Labour government. And it was the right wing of the Labour Party, and particularly the Labour Foreign Secretary, Ernest Bevin, who was adamant and who was actually organised the sinking of the ships of Jewish survivors to Palestine. And their counterparts now, their heirs now, have got the nerve to accuse us, the left, the socialists, the people who are expressing support for the oppressed in Israel now and the occupied territories. They're accusing us of anti-Semitism, which is an absolute outrage. Now, obviously, what I have to say that the Jewish immigration to Palestine has been turned and exploited by the heirs of Balfour and of Bevin. They've been turned into an absolute monstrous attack on the human rights of the local, the indigenous population of the area. It's horrific, it's barbaric. It amounts also almost to genocide. I do think that there are rather glib comparisons made with the Nazis, which what the Israeli government is doing is not unique. It's on the counterpart, if you like, it's on a scale comparable to what the Americans did to the Vietnamese and to countless other nations, the Belgians in the Congo, the French in Algeria, the British, by the way, in Kenya. I'm just reading a book about that, which is absolutely blood-curdling. It's horrific. Almost the entire Kikuyu population in Kenya were caged in concentration camps, tortured and systematically slaughtered in the most barbaric way. So it's not necessary to brand the Israeli regime as on a level with the Nazis. Let's just say they're as bad as the British. And that's enough of a condemnation. So what I want to say is, there is now, I think, a sea change. We can see, I think we can all, it's palpable, we can feel it in Britain, in America, from what I read, and so on. There's a sea change. That now the mood has moved towards a defense of the Palestinian people against what can be seen as the most brutal and tyrannical and bloodthirsty treatment that they're receiving. And we're seeing again a growth of that internationalism. We're seeing it, as I say, at this meeting too. By the way, somebody raised the question of Jewish opposition to the Israeli government. I would say it's interesting that I would say most of the Jews in the British Labour Party are sympathising with the Palestinians. Many Jews have been expelled from the Labour Party as paradoxically under the slur that they're anti-Semites. At one point, I was thinking of saying, I think it may be true that the Labour Party is anti-Semitic. Look how many Jews they're expelling. That's the proof of it. So, I mean, I would say that, by the way, to Graham, you're quite right. I do feel a little bit miffed that I was not singled out in the way that Graham was, although I would say that I do find myself, like him, outside the ranks of the Labour Party now. They suspended me along with 5,000 fellow Labour Party members in West Ham and East Ham CLPs. I don't say that was due to my activities. It was due to the inspiring and campaigning work which my comrades in, particularly in West Ham Labour Party, have been doing. And they are now maintaining that tradition under the name of Newham Socialist Labour, which I think is a model for the whole of the Labour Party in the country. It's a split which is developing, which is long overdue, where the mass of the activists will definitely come with the left. So I'd just like to finish by saying that thank you to all the comrades who come. It's great to see all the comrades from so many countries, comrades from 4 continents who are here. We particularly welcome the Durban comrades, but also all the others from all over the world who've come. Do please keep coming to our meetings. We have regular weekly meetings with where we've had comrades speaking, representing the struggles of comrades in of the working class in India, in Lebanon, in Belarus, in Senegal, in so many countries, had first-hand eyewitness reports, and we discuss them and we try to put them into a proper theoretical context so that we can all build on the movement that's developing. So please, everybody, sign up to win, come to our meetings, and thank you for your attendance.
Comrades, thanks so much, Roger, for a comprehensive landscape of the issues, and for I think we all learned a lot about the Bund and about how Zionism has arisen. Some revelations which we need to think through. Now, look, I'd like to invite Ronnie. I think he's a little bit shy at the moment, but while I'm saying that, I think you're a little obscured. But Ronnie, I'd like you to come in and okay, but not quite, and respond to the points. Just before we do that, could I share a cartoon, if I can find it, which shows here we are. This shows what the Durban workers did in 2008 when the AK-47 bullets and munitions arrived for Robert Mugabe when he was waging war on the Zimbabwean people. It's quite diplomacy, but very effective. Workers' action, not violent, but sometimes not quiet, but actually damned effective. I'll just return to you, Ronnie. Please come in, and then I want to just make some announcements at the end. Ronnie, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. I don't know what you said about me being obscured or something. I can just tell you all, it is freezing cold here in Johannesburg. It's in the middle of winter. We've had an Antarctic chill coming through, and I was rushing to get my blanket as an old man to cover my knees and legs and so on. But just on the issue, Roger and everybody else who've said these points, Jay, you there, Buddy, Billy Nair, one of the greatest communist, socialist, trade unionist, liberation fighters we've ever had. It's not to leave it to the youth. I agree with everyone. The upswell from the youth is invigorating us all. That's the future. It's damn amazing everywhere. But you know something? Us with gray hair, I don't have any hair, like Themos over there and quite a number of others. But you'll find that the young people, Roger, without any hair either, you know it, the young people want to learn. And they come to the oldies, the Jack Dashers, their great dock workers leader in London back in the day. They come to the oldies, Louise Colvin there in Durban, and they want to say, just explain things like Roger just has in terms of the origins of Zionism. They're amazed when we explain that it was this minority cult and that in fact, most Jewish people in the past were of working class background, East End of London, in South Africa, New York, etc., out of Tsarist Russia. We're socialists, and the big change, of course, is that the Jewish communities all over the world today, certainly in South Africa and the USA and Britain, etc., are middle class. They become petty bourgeois and so on. And that makes this huge change and difference. But it is true. I don't want to be optimistic. America, the United States, gives us the biggest hope in terms of young Americans, Jews. But by God, it's not the case in South Africa. And I don't think it's the case in Britain, where I've been to many, many a time. And it's not the case in Israel. It is abysmal. They are so brainwashed by Hasbara there. So, yes, we want to be optimistic. And I'm going to come back to the one democratic state issue and the socialism for Israel. My God, maybe we hope. But let me just say about ageism, that if you want to go out into the night quietly and not into the night making the point, then of course we give up on our experience. And yes, most of us here today are of an older generation, but I want to encourage you all with the last remaining times of our lives. I mean, I'm in my I'm over 80. God, I'm living on borrowed time. That's why I'm so energetic now. I want to put it back. And that's what we have to do, like Jack Dash. I lived in London when he led those dock workers in the 60s. So please don't simply say that it's wonderful that they're the youth and it's up to them. We do have a role. We've got to get back in there. So just a few points. I don't want to start with the best, most positive suggestion that came out of this meeting, because we've got to end on the most optimistic note. So I'm going to come back to the dock workers and Durban and the wonderful work Jihan. Everybody should salute Jihan. She has worked like a Trojan this last few days. Absolutely. But so I want to just mention a little bit in relation to perhaps not being over optimistic. I've said a bit of it. We want to work for socialism. Don't think that, and we really shouldn't. I've seen it with some comrades, David, with Black Lives Matter. And I've seen it internationally, especially in the UK with comrades I've worked with, part in Europe and some comrades in South Africa, who seem to think that if we bang the working class or the socialist drum and come up, as some sects of the left do, and actually say we have to have the unity of Jewish and Arab workers in Israel, and this is for them the end and the be all of everything. And these youngsters scratch their heads and think, what are these guys talking? We've got to take it by steps. I mean, I know comrades, good comrades, who were not enamored with Black Lives Matter because it was identity politics. And they were saying, where's the class issue? My God, they don't see in racism the expression of capitalism. That's what we have to bring together. The racist, the gender, the class divides in society, and to mold them together. And that's how we're going to convince people that the only answer, of course, is socialism in the end. So like Rob Dyer was saying, when he talked about, you know, the only solution can be socialism, but it's going to be tough and hard. And he's right. We've got to take the people with us without being sly, without being opportunistic, being prepared to give the class analysis, but to interact this, to fuse it so that people come to understand what we say about Zionism and narrow nationalism and the populism and so on. Look how many workers, whether in the northern parts of England or in the in parts of the United States, and in goodness, we know in America and even in Europe, with the rise of fascism and the catering to the working class, which is what happened in the 1930s. So bear that in mind. I want to just say one word to Roger, who speaks so brilliantly. But since Roger, I made a point about Nazism and certain comparisons. And I absolutely agree with you that what Britain, what the United States, the French, the Belgians, the Portuguese, these monsters, but what was that? This colonial rule of theirs. I regard that as fascist measures. And I believe that with Jewish people and the way Israel is behaving and using the worst of colonial measures, and therefore fascist measures and Nazi measures of collective punishment, that yes, I dare to say to them that Einstein and Hannah Arendt made that warning, and that Aharon Sisling said in 1948, we are behaving like the Nazis and my whole being is trembling. And my view is that we are, and there's this tendency to become so sensitive to the Hasbara, to the racism, to the attacks of Zionists using the point that, my goodness, you're calling us Nazis, it shows you anti-Semitic, etc. I think we must touch them on their nerve endings. And when there's a comparison, and I'm not saying this is what we now should be doing, I agree with you, Roger, and I have done that myself to avoid it. But when there are certain times when Israel behaves in this way, and I did this in 2006 when they bombed schools in Lebanon and children there were incinerated, I said, you're behaving like Nazis now. This is what Aharon Sisling said. Helen Suzman, the darling of America and British liberals, who was a lone voice against apartheid, she took me to the Human Rights Commission here and said it was hate speech. I won the case hands down. And that was a great blow to this kind of Hasbara of theirs. Let me come now to the end. I want to say this. I think it's been the most fantastic event I've participated in. So David and Roger and Jabu, what you are showing and what the comrades here are showing is that when we have a network like this, an international workers network for socialism, it is so creative. It so strengthens the bonds of solidarity. We need more of this. And yet, I think in the last period, months of lockdown, I think I've appeared on 100 or more Zoom meetings. I love them because I don't have to go out into the chilly Joburg nights and drive across town to damn meetings. I love the webinars and I'm involved in a whole range, but we need to promote this kind, an internationalist labor working class for socialism webinar. You are spot on and I salute you. My final point, Steve Zeltzer, San Francisco. Wow, wow. What an incredible suggestion. Zihan, Louise, comrades in Durban, this is the best, most exciting recommendation I have come across, I have heard in years of discussing BDS. We had problems, and Louisa said it, We just heard about the Zim line coming in a few days ago. The workers, the dockers, we've referred to weaknesses there. And yet the most spectacular work was done. And Jihan, you and Nadia Mir and others, Naim Gina, who we sent down from Joburg to reinforce you, but those dockers you brought into the fray, David, what they did was spectacular. Jay, you said everything right, except you used one word wrong. You said it was a failure. It wasn't. It was a great success. You don't achieve the victory overnight. And it's laid the basis. Durban was made aware through this activity. It was brilliant. We now have the cards in place. We have the network and the links for when the Zim line comes into Durban in July. But the resolution that Steve Zeltzer has suggested is magic. It's magic because that's how it will work. The moment it's issued as that call internationally, Jay, the workers, all these unions in South Africa with all the weaknesses and problems, they're going to toe the line. It will be the case everywhere in the world. That's one thing I feel absolutely optimistic about. So we look, David Hempson and Roger Silverman and our friend there, Steve, the comrade Zeltzer, and others, get working on this right away. We will take it up in South Africa with our trade unions immediately. But if we can get the resolution through, then Zim lines is going to be hounded out everywhere. And the Israeli flag, false flagging, the cargo, false flagging, Hong Kong, Panama, or whatever, wherever it's connected to Israeli shipping, that's going to be boycotted. We're going to succeed. It's going to be a mighty, mighty blow. And that's it. I mean, it's boycott, divestment, and sanctions. It's international solidarity. It's working class leadership. So coming back to Israel and Zionism and the Palestine, yes, the more the working class are involved internationally in support and solidarity, so we strengthen socialism within and throughout the Middle East. And the Arab street, in terms of international solidarity, is to the fore. It's more important than us. The Arab street has shown in the last few days that Trump's plan at normalization between Israel, Netanyahu, and their grand desire and achievement, that's the solution. They've normalized with the Gulf states, with Morocco, with Saudis, and they're on a winning streak. Just like Trump had said, Jerusalem with his New Deal, Jerusalem is off the table. My God, Mr. Trump, Mr. Biden, you lot, you foul lot, running the Labour Party, and Boris bloody Johnson and Macron, it's not bloody off the table. It's back on the table. They're not going to win in Jerusalem. They're not going to win in the Middle East. And it's our strength and energy and commitment that can help, comrades. This has been David, Roger, thank you. You have innovated me. You've given me another week at least of life. Okay, much more. Thanks so much, comrades. Aman Kla Jabu. Aman Kla. Come on, unmute, David. Everybody.
I'm unmuted. Aman.
Aman.
Palestine will be free.
Palestine
will be free. Palestine will be free.
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
We need to use the social media.
Long live international solidarity. Forward to socialism, comrades. Forward.
Yeah.
Viva
Forward.
Palestine, viva.
Free
Palestine, free.
Palestine.
Thank you, comrades.
Fantastic.
Thank you, everybody. Right.
Ronnie, we're surfing a wave here now. I feel we're back in Durban again in that way. Look, just one point I want to bring about, to explain. In the 1973 strikes, mass strikes we had in South Africa, in Durban, and then it's spreading more widely. The slogan was "Fila Muntu Ufiza Tekiza," and interpreted, that is, man is dead, but the spirit lives on. We are reviving our bodies and our spirits. And I think this is a celebration of that. I just want to ask Roger if there's some announcements to be made. And Job, who I hoped was going to stay on just to give us a final Amandla. But, or Ed, did you have an announcement?
Well, shall I just say about next week?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Next week, our French comrades are speaking about the crisis that is developing in France. I won't anticipate what they're going to say, but it'll be a great meeting, and I hope you'll all come. Same time next Sunday.
Okay, and Jabu, do we still have you? I was making her stay on. Unfortunately, we just lost her. But Felicity, I think you had one last point to make.
Yeah, thank you, David. It's really aimed at the UK people who are here, that the campaign to defend the NHS is kind of moving up, and we have a specific set of social media posts going out tomorrow morning. And we just ask everybody who does social media in any way, shape or form to share them, please. And the second point is that we produced a statement for the G7 who are coming to Britain in early June about the climate crisis. And if anyone here would like to endorse that statement, please can you let me know? And I'll send you a copy, via email or via the WIN system. But both of those are big issues, and big issues where we've got to involve the youth as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Felicity. Can I say to Ronnie that, look, we've recorded, this discussion. It's been very rich and it's been very inspiring. And I'd like us to be able to break it down so that, even those who are not prepared to listen a full 2.25 hours, can get the highlights. Because actually, I think we've really shone a light on what solidarity means and the cost of solidarity and how we can overcome the contradictions. When I exposed the fact that the unloading was still happening and the loading is happening right now, it's not with any pride. It's just, let's have the truth. Once we've got the truth, we can actually do something about it. I'm in touch with the dockers, now and early in tomorrow morning, and I hope that we're going to be getting direct reports from action taking place. And we live in optimism and hope because that's the creed of socialism. We will change the world. Amandla.
Okay, David, can you hear me?
I'm still in touch, yeah.
Oh, I thought the meeting was over. Sorry, I just wanted to say thanks very much. It was a brilliant meeting, and we'll keep in touch, eh?
Absolutely, Ronnie. I was about to say that back to you.
Okay. Well, since we're still on, I want to say to Comrade Felicity, darling, this is informal chat. Comrade Felicity, I know you live at Pudlians. You're the grandest and you're the greatest. You're a red city.
We are.
And I know we know what they've done. Was it from Margaret Thatcher's time when they decided to disembowel Liverpool and break down the docks? And you're the poorest city. in Britain. From one point of view, you're the richest city. You're red. You're Liverpool red. I love your football team. And your football team is a team of socialism.
It is.
It's a socialist team. I'm well aware of that.
Yeah.
And I love El Neni. Because I lived in London, I happen to be, and I don't really like, I hate the bloody board, the Arsenal Football Club board, and the Irish Spectators. And, you know, we were one of the first teams in Britain who had so many black players in the Arsenal team. But I've been really very involved with John Timon, who's been mobilizing in support of El Neni, because the Zionists attacked him and pressurized the club, and they gave a mealy-mouthed statement out, which was pressure on El Neni. So today, John Timon and others, it's the last day of the championship table, they were taking a petition through to the club at 2 o'clock. The game was at 5, which has thousands of names condemning supporting El Neni. And we've seen Pogba and these other players through Britain waving the Palestinian flag is really very important. But Felicity, when I'm able to get to Britain again, I've had my first jab just the other day. I'm going to come and see you in Liverpool,
yes,
okay?
Yes, please.
We'll have a good old Mothers Up there, okay?
That would be very good.
Okay.
Ronnie's first call somewhere a little bit further than Golders Green.
But great, and Roger, you know, you were really good. I mean, we can have further discussion about this Nazi factor. I'm you know, tentative about it, but there you go. And Jay, great to see you. You know, we miss your brother so much. Claire Bless is from South Africa. She's a great internationalist, as is Maddie Gray. Yeah. Are you in Cape Town, Maddie? Because we need you for BDS. Maddie Gray was the centerpiece of the anti-apartheid movement in Sweden. Yeah. You're back in Cape Town, Maddie, are you?
No, I'm not, Ronnie. I'm in Stockholm.
Oh, you're in Stockholm. Yeah.
When I can, I will return to. I will return back to Cape.
Well, Maddie, you did such a great job. You're a great internationalist, and lots of love and hugs. And then I wanted to mention Claire Bless, who's very quiet. Well, she's not quiet. Boy, can she talk up, but she doesn't speak much on these things. She's a great pal of ours, and she was outstanding in the work, the clandestine work she did for us in the armed struggle. We met up with her. She's from France. I always thought she was German. She had been married to a German guy, and she was lecturing at Lusaka University. We had contact with her, and she helped us in most extraordinary way. After liberation, she joined our National Defense Force and became a brigadier, one short of a general. And she ought to say something to everybody now. Claire, show them your face. Come on, Claire. Or have you run away? Come on, Claire.
No, she's not run away. I can see she just muted.
Oh, yeah. Come and say something, Claire.